Welcome to the deep dive. Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this comforting expectation of precision.
Right. It feels very binary, like engineering almost.
Exactly. Like if you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points to it and says, there it is, broken.
Right. Broken or not broken. Very clean.
It's super clean. But then you step into the world of long COVID, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just useless. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky.
Oh, absolutely. Murky is the perfect word for it.
And the sheer scale of it makes that ambiguity a real massive problem. I mean, as of late 2023, there were over 771 million confirmed COVID-19 cases worldwide.
It's a staggering number.
It really is. And for a significant, very real chunk of you out there listening, or perhaps people you love, that initial infection didn't just run its course and end. It evolved into long COVID.
Which brings us directly to the core mission of our discussion today. We're looking at a brand new 2025 systematic review.
Right, the one published in BMJ Open.
Yes. Conducted by a researcher named McDowell and a team from the Health Information and Quality Authority in Ireland. And what this team basically set out to do was gather the best available data from around the world to try and settle a debate that has gotten, honestly, surprisingly heated.
Yeah, heated might actually be an understatement. I mean, we've all been told our entire lives that exercise is medicine. It is completely ingrained in us.
Oh, yeah. You feel sluggish, you go for a run.
Exactly. Or if you're recovering from a standard illness, you start taking walks to build your strength back up. But for long COVID patients, that conventional wisdom has this giant flashing question mark hanging over it.
A huge one.
Right. Like, is hitting the treadmill a cure that helps you reclaim your old life? Or is it actually a dangerous trigger that will plunge you into a much worse state? So today we are going to unpack the actual data on both the effectiveness and the biological tolerance of exercise for this specific condition.
And to really understand why this Irish research team needed to conduct this review in the first place, we have to acknowledge the tension on the ground. Because prescribing exercise for long COVID hasn't just caused polite debate in medical journals.
No, not at all.
It has literally sparked public protests.
Yes. Actual protests. I mean, people actively campaigning against exercise trials. When I first read that in the source material, I literally had to stop and reread it.
It's jarring, right?
Totally. It seems so counterintuitive to everything we've been taught about, physical rehabilitation.
It does seem counterintuitive until you look at the clinical parallels. Long COVID presents with this sprawling range of symptoms across multiple bodily systems.
Like the severe fatigue and the breathlessness.
Right. Severe fatigue, breathlessness, cognitive dysfunction, which people call brain fog, and even cardiovascular irregularities. But what experts and patients quickly realize is that this profile looks remarkably similar to another complex chronic condition.
ME/CFS, right?
Exactly. ME/CFS. That stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis, which is more commonly known as chronic fatigue syndrome.
And the crucial connection there, if I'm understanding the source right, hinges on a very specific biological response called PM, or post-exertional malaise.
Yes. PM is the defining factor here.
Now, my understanding of PEM is that it's fundamentally different from the good soreness you get after a workout.
Oh, completely different.
Like, it isn't just delayed onset muscle soreness or DOMS where your quads ache for 2 days after you do heavy squats. It sounds more like a systemic shutdown triggered by even minor stress.
That is exactly the distinction we need to make. DOMS is just localized micro-tearing of muscle fibers that your body easily repairs. PIM, on the other hand, is a profound, multi-system exacerbation of symptoms.
So it's not just muscle pain.
No, not at all. For people experiencing post-exertional malaise, even minimal exertion can trigger a severe biological crash. And we aren't just talking about a heavy gym session. Exertion in this context could literally be a short walk to the mailbox. Or could even be severe cognitive exertion, like navigating a highly stressful work meeting, or even just balancing a checkbook.
Wow. Wait, really? So the brain working hard can trigger the physical crash just as easily as the body working hard?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the resulting crash is just debilitating. The symptoms significantly worsen across the board.
What does that look like in reality?
We see an onset of sore throats, brutal headaches, widespread muscle and joint pain, profound confusion, and this complete draining drop in cellular energy.
And the source notes that these crashes aren't just a brief afternoon slump either. Patients report them lasting for days.
Days, weeks, or sometimes they last for years.
Years. That is terrifying.
It is. In the worst-case scenarios, a patient's baseline energy level permanently lowers and never fully resolves after a crash.
Wow. Okay. When you understand that mechanism, you can absolutely understand the sheer terror a long COVID patient might feel when a well-meaning doctor casually suggests, hey, why don't you try some light aerobic exercise to get your energy back?
Exactly, because in historical ME/CFS research, exercise challenges were actually used as a mechanism to deliberately provoke and study the worsening of symptoms.
Oh, man. So they used exercise as the trigger on purpose.
Yes, to see the crash happen. So when long COVID patients started exhibiting this exact same PEM response, the alarm bells rang loudly across the patient advocacy community.
And it reached a boiling point in the United States, right? Patients and their representatives literally petitioned the National Institutes of Health.
They did?
They demanded that the NIH stop funding clinical trials that involved exercise for long COVID.
Yeah, they viewed these trials as inherently unethical.
It makes complete sense when you phrase it like that. I mean, it sounds like prescribing exercise for long COVID is being viewed almost like telling someone with a compound fracture in their leg to just walk it off.
Right.
The supposed treatment might actually be the very thing causing structural damage.
That is a highly accurate analogy for how the patient community felt.
Hmm.
The fear was that clinical researchers were taking a vulnerable, neurologically fragile population and knowingly pushing them into a severe crash state.
But there's another side to this, isn't there?
There is. Because on the other side of the aisle, the medical community knows the physiological reality of deconditioning. Prolonged bed rest and inactivity carries severe health risks.
Like muscle atrophy.
Bright muscle atrophy, cardiovascular decline, increased risk of blood clots. So the Irish research team realized they needed to objectively analyze the randomized controlled trials, which are the gold standard of scientific evidence, to see what actually happens to long COVID patients in a highly monitored, structured exercise environment.
Right, because there was so much fear about causing crashes, we have to look at what actually happens in the controlled environment of these trials. What did the data actually reveal when patients got on the treadmill?
Well, the researchers pulled together 8 randomized controlled trials from all over the globe. We are talking about diverse medical systems here.
Spain, France, Turkey, China, and Poland, right?
Exactly. And importantly, they looked at a wide variety of interventions. This wasn't just a generic mandate to go jog on a track.
Right, they mixed it up.
They did. They tested highly supervised aerobic exercise. They tested targeted strength training protocols. They looked at specific diaphragmatic breathing exercises.
Oh, and they even evaluated telerehabilitation, which I thought was fascinating.
Yeah, the telerehab is really interesting. Patients were guided through structured exercise routines remotely, via video, in the safety of their own homes.
And here is where the story takes a turn, I think, because despite all that valid fear surrounding PM, the data from these 8 trials revealed some surprisingly positive short-term wins.
He really did.
I mean, the numbers actually look quite good.
The overarching evidence suggests that structured exercise interventions consistently lead to short-term physical improvements. To quantify this, the researchers looked at specific standardized metrics.
Like the SF-12 survey.
Yes, exactly. They measured health-related quality of life using that instrument, the SF-12.
And just to clarify for the listener, the SF-12 isn't just a generic, how do you feel out of 10 question, right?
Correct. The SF-12 specifically separates the physical domain from the mental domain. It asks detailed questions about your ability to complete daily tasks, climb stairs, or carry groceries.
Okay, so it's very functional.
Very functional. And patients in the exercise groups showed significantly larger improvements in that physical domain compared to the control groups who did not exercise.
They also measured fatigue, which is arguably the most debilitating symptom for many of these patients. They used tools like the Chalder Fatigue Questionnaire.
Yes, the Chalder is a great tool for this.
Yeah. And what I found really interesting about it is that a tool like the Chalder doesn't just ask if you are sleepy, it measures the actual mechanics of your exhaustion.
Right, exactly.
Like how difficult it is to physically initiate a task, or whether you struggle to find the right words when speaking.
Exactly. It captures both the physical sluggishness and the cognitive drag. And across the board, the exercise groups showed significantly greater improvements on these scales.
So they felt genuinely better.
Yes. The patients literally reported feeling less exhausted and more capable after undergoing these multi-week rehabilitation programs.
And they also backed up those subjective questionnaires with objective physical tests, right?
They did. The classic metric used in almost all of these respiratory and cardiovascular studies is the 6-minute walk test.
Which is exactly what it sounds like. They put you in a hospital corridor and measure the exact distance you can walk in 6 minutes?
Yep. And every single study in this review that measured this metric found that the walking distance improved following the exercise interventions. Furthermore, studies specifically out of China and France showed significant improvements in perceived breathlessness, which doctors call dyspnoea. The patients subjectively felt like they could breathe easier while moving.
Okay, let me jump in and push back on that for a second.
Sure.
The patients feel less breathless, and they're objectively walking further down that hospital corridor. But did the exercise actually shield their lungs? Because we know that the initial COVID-19 viral infection often caused actual structural scarring and damage to lung tissue.
That is a phenomenal distinction to make, and it really highlights a fundamental concept in how human physiology adapts to chronic illness.
Okay.
The short answer to your question is, no. The exercise did not heal the structural damage in their lungs.
That is fascinating. So wait, how are they walking further if their lungs are still functionally damaged?
Well, when researchers measured actual pulmonary function using a test called spirometry, the results were very telling.
Spirometry is the one where you blow into the tube.
Yes, it's a mechanical test. You blow as hard and as fast as you can into a tube, and it measures the strict volume and flow of air your lungs can process. They also measured VO2 max, which tracks the maximum absolute amount of oxygen your body can utilize during peak exertion.
And what did those show?
Across the trials, those strict structural metrics did not consistently improve.
Okay, so the lungs themselves, the physical hardware, weren't mechanically better.
Right. The hardware remained largely unchanged. What improved was the patient's overall functional capacity and their subjective feeling of fitness.
Like their body learned to work around the damage.
Exactly. Think of it as cardiovascular compensation. Their leg muscles got stronger and more efficient from the strength training.
Yeah.
Their heart became slightly more efficient at pumping whatever oxygen was available.
Ah, I see.
And crucially, their psychological and neurological tolerance for exertion went up. They felt less breathless because the rest of their body was better conditioned to handle the physical load, not because the underlying viral scarring on the lung tissue had magically reversed.
Which, if you think about it, is still a profound victory for daily life. I mean, if you can walk through the grocery store without feeling like you are suffocating, that fundamentally improves your reality.
Oh, without a doubt.
It almost doesn't matter if your spirometer reading is exactly the same as it was a month ago. You have your independence back.
Absolutely. A functional improvement is a real improvement.
Right.
But this brings us right back to the central tension that sparked those protests we talked about earlier.
Oh, right. The crashes.
Exactly. If these patients are feeling physically better, if they're walking further, and their muscles are operating more efficiently, what about the crashes? Did pushing their bodies to achieve these gains trigger post-exertional malaise?
Did the structured exercise actually hurt anyone?
Right. Because overcoming fatigue in the moment is great, but not if you spend the next 2 weeks bedridden in agony.
So what did the review find about that?
Well, the review looked very closely at the tolerance of these interventions, and the raw statistics on participant dropouts are remarkably encouraging. Across 7 of the studies that reported their dropout data in sufficient detail, there was a total of 252 participants who received an active exercise intervention.
Okay, 252 people.
Out of those 252 people, only one single person discontinued the program due to tolerance-related issues.
Wait, really? One person out of 252 dropped out?
Just one.
And what was the specific issue for that one patient?
They experienced chest pain and were removed from the trial as a precaution.
Okay, one dropout is incredibly low. But what about adverse events? Surely there were people who didn't officially quit the trial, but, still had a bad reaction to the exertion.
There were some, yeah. Mild adverse events were reported in one specific study. Patients experienced things like uncomfortable chest tightness, a temporary feeling of profound weakness, or a persistent cough after the workout.
So just mild temporary stuff.
Yeah. Generally speaking, out of the 5 studies that specifically tracked and reported on adverse events, 4 of them recorded absolutely 0 negative reactions.
Wow.
By all traditional clinical metrics, the interventions were incredibly well tolerated.
Okay. But, how do I say this? If post-exertional malaise is the defining terror of long COVID and the whole reason people were protesting the NIH in the first place, how exactly did these researchers measure the crashes?
Whoa.
Like, did they send patients home with monitors and track their symptoms 48 hours after the treadmill test to see if their systems plummeted?
This right here is the major catch. It is the glaring blind spot of the entire systematic review and, honestly, of the current field of research.
Okay, brace me. What is it?
Despite the massive vocal fear of PM, despite the established clinical parallels with ME/CFS, not a single one of the 8 randomized controlled trials directly assessed post-exertional symptoms as a primary or secondary outcome.
What? How is that even mathematically possible in modern science?
I know, it's wild.
How can the medical community design a study for a condition that is historically famous for delayed post-workout crashes and completely forget to measure the delayed crash itself?
It is a profound omission. But, it happens more often than you'd think in early-stage clinical research.
So what did they measure instead?
The researchers relied on broad, general fatigue scores taken at the end of a multi-week program. They did not implement the specific granular tracking required to see what happens to a patient 24, 48, or 72 hours after an individual bout of exertion.
So they just assumed it was fine because nobody quit.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
They looked at the low dropout rates and the lack of immediate hospitalizations and concluded the exercise was tolerated.
That's a huge leap.
It is. The complete absence of specific PM tracking means we cannot definitively say the exercise didn't cause crashes. We can only confidently say that if crashes did happen, they weren't severe enough to make the patients formally quit the clinical trials.
That is wild. It tells me that this specific area of research is still in its absolute infancy, which naturally forces us to look a lot closer at how these 8 studies were actually constructed.
Right. Because the methodology matters.
Because if they miss something as fundamental as tracking PM, what else is shaky about this data?
Well, to their credit, the authors of the BMJ Open review were very transparent about the severe limitations of the current evidence base. First and foremost, the sample sizes of these trials were tiny.
How tiny are we talking?
Across the 8 studies, the number of actual participants ranged from as low as 39 to a maximum of 119. The average was just 56 people per study.
56 people. Being used to represent a global patient population of hundreds of millions, that is a microscopic snapshot.
It really is. Furthermore, the follow-up periods were incredibly short. The average length of follow-up was only 8.5 weeks.
Wow, barely 2 months.
Exactly. So we know with decent certainty that patients felt functionally better at the end of a 2-month program. But do those cardiovascular benefits last at 6 months? Does the crippling fatigue return after a year? We simply have no data to answer those questions.
Let's also unpack the actual scientific quality of these studies. The review authors use something called the Cochrane Risk of Bias tool, right?
Yes, they did.
Which is essentially the gold standard for judging whether a scientific study is structurally trustworthy.
Yes. The Cochrane tool looks at how patients are randomly assigned, whether the evaluators are blinded to who gets the treatment, and, crucially, whether the researchers report exactly what they promised to report when they first registered the trial.
And how did these 8 studies fare?
Well, while 4 of the studies were rated as having a low risk of bias, 2 were rated as unclear, and 2 were explicitly flagged as having high risk of bias.
Why high risk? Did they falsify their data or something?
No, it wasn't falsified data. But they committed a major methodological foul. Those 2 high-risk studies actually changed their primary outcomes after the trial had already begun.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They originally registered to measure one specific metric as their main goal, but when they published their results, they highlighted a completely different metric.
Ah, I see. It's like calling your shot in a game of pool, missing the pocket completely, but the ball accidentally bounces into a different pocket and you turn around and say, yep, that's exactly what I meant to do.
Exactly.
You cannot move the scientific goalposts after the experiment has started.
Precisely. It introduces a high risk of selective reporting, highlighting the data that looks good, and quietly burying the data that didn't pan out.
That definitely throws a wrench in things.
It does. And beyond the bias issues, there were also some fascinating quirks in the study designs that really highlight how experimental and Wild West this phase of research really is.
What kind of quirks?
For instance, there was a study out of Poland conducted by a researcher named Rutkowski. They wanted to test the efficacy of aerobic exercise, but they decided to compare a traditional in-person hospital-based rehab program to a virtual reality aerobic exercise program.
Wait, they put neurologically fatigued long COVID patients into VR headsets.
They did.
That sounds intense.
Yeah. The hypothesis likely being that navigating a virtual environment while doing light physical movements might offer cognitive distraction, like engaging the neuroplasticity of the brain while the body works.
And did it work better?
Interestingly, they found no significant difference in the clinical outcomes. Both the traditional hospital group and the VR headset group improved similarly in their pulmonary function, their walk tests, and their fatigue scores.
That's a highly innovative approach.
It is. But it really underscores the fact that scientists are currently throwing every conceivable idea at the wall to see what sticks.
But out of all the limitations, the part that really stood out to me from the review was the lack of what they call phenotyping.
Oh, yes. This is a massive issue.
Because long COVID is not a monolith. It isn't just one thing. Some people primarily suffer from brain fog, some have terrifying heart palpitations, and some simply cannot catch their breath.
Right.
But these clinical trials mostly just lumped everyone together into one generic bucket.
That is a critical flaw in the early research. I mean, only 3 of the 8 studies specifically required patients to present with dyspnea breathlessness
Yeah.
to even be included in the trial.
And the others?
The others just accepted anyone with a general long COVID diagnosis. And even more surprisingly, not a single one of the 8 studies measured or accounted for the patient's pre-COVID fitness levels.
Which seems insane to me.
It's a huge oversight.
Right. Lumping all these patients together without knowing their baseline fitness is like testing a brand new experimental premium gasoline in a fleet of cars, but not bothering to write down whether you are pouring it into a high-performance Ferrari or an agricultural tractor.
That's the perfect way to put it.
I mean, a former marathon runner who develops long COVID is going to respond to a supervised aerobic intervention radically differently than someone who lived a completely sedentary lifestyle before they ever caught the virus.
Exactly. The baseline matters immensely. And the authors of the review highlight this as a major, urgent implication for future research. You cannot treat long COVID as a single, uniform disease.
Because the treatments need to be different.
Right. If a patient does not present with breathlessness, an intervention heavily focused on aerobic capacity and diaphragmatic breathing exercises might be a complete waste of time.
And potentially harmful, right?
Yes. Conversely, if a patient presents strongly with the MECFS phenotype, meaning they are highly prone to post-exertional malaise, they require a radically different, much gentler and intensely monitored approach compared to someone whose primary symptom is just general muscular deconditioning from being bedridden for a month.
So, synthesizing all of this, what does this mean for you, the listener? If you or a family member or a friend is currently trying to navigate the incredibly muddy waters of long COVID, how do we apply this data to real life?
It's the million-dollar question.
The overarching takeaway seems to be that exercise is not the universal, guaranteed villain that some advocates feared it might be. Based on the limited evidence we have right now, structured, personalized exercise appears to be generally safe, and it provides real physical benefits in the short term.
Yes, it improves your functional quality of life.
Right. It genuinely reduces the feeling of fatigue, and it increases your capacity to walk and move. But, and this is the crucial caveat to remember, it is not a confirmed magical cure-all.
Not at all.
The science is very much playing catch-up. The fact that the medical community hasn't rigorously tracked long-term outcomes, and the fact that they completely forgot to specifically measure post-exertional malaise, means we have to tread very carefully. The practical recommendation here isn't to go out and aggressively start training for a 5K tomorrow. Nor is it to curl up in a ball and avoid moving altogether out of a paralyzing fear of crashing. It is about finding a careful, self-paced, highly tailored approach.
It has to be deeply personal.
You have to listen to the whisper of your own body before it starts to scream, and ideally, work with a medical professional who understands that the old school, push through the pain mentality might be the absolute worst possible advice for this specific condition.
I think that is the perfect summary of the physical reality. And, it leads us to one final, really profound thread to pull on before we wrap up.
Let's hear it.
We talked earlier about the spirometry tests, how the exercise protocols improved the subjective feeling of fatigue and breathlessness, but didn't necessarily change the physical lung mechanics.
Right. The structural damage remained, but the performance improved.
Exactly. This raises a fascinating question about the intricate mind-body connection in chronic post-viral illnesses. When a human body goes through a severe, prolonged trauma, like a COVID-19 infection, the central nervous system can essentially get stuck in a hypervigilant state of high alert.
Like it's constantly bracing for impact.
Yes. It constantly sends danger signals to the brain. This manifests as extreme, unexplainable fatigue or the terrifying sensation of breathlessness, even long after the immediate physical threat of the active virus has been cleared from the system.
Wow. Okay, I see where you're going with this.
So if these patients are feeling drastically functionally better after these exercise protocols, but their lung mechanics haven't physically changed, it forces us to ask a big question.
Are the benefits of the exercise primarily physiological?
Exactly. Or is the structured, safe, gradual exposure to physical stress actually doing something much deeper? Is the treadmill slowly retraining a traumatized nervous system?
That is a crazy concept to think about. Like, is the act of controlled movement teaching the brain that it is finally safe to exert energy again without triggering the biological alarm bells?
It suggests that healing from long COVID might not just be about rebuilding the muscle. It might be about gently recalibrating the mind's perception of the body's safety.
That is incredible. And understanding that invisible intersection between the nervous system and the physical world seems like exactly where the next frontier of this research needs to go.